Officer founds little girl in nuclear power plant. My stomach hurts and it's green. Everyone in tears. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Before we get into the story, take a second and imagine you're sitting in your favorite chair, maybe with a cup of coffee or tea beside you. Let this be your moment. Now close your eyes, take a breath, and come with me into this family's life, where love gets lost for a while, but never completely disappears. It started on a rainy afternoon in a small American town, the kind of town where most people knew each other's names and the streets grew quiet after the sun went down. In a modest house at the edge of the neighborhood lived two sisters, Emily and Claire. Emily was the older one, careful, observant, always ready to protect. Claire, a little younger, moved like sunlight through the rooms, humming songs she made up on the spot, her laughter the kind that made even tired neighbors smile. Their father, Daniel, had once been the kind of man who fixed anything that broke. Neighbors would knock on the door with a broken lamp or a squeaky chair, and he'd welcome them in, promising to take a look and usually sending the item back better than before. There used to be music in that house too. On weekends he'd put on an old record and stand in the kitchen, pretending the worn linoleum was a dance floor. He would hold out his hands and spin each daughter around until they were dizzy and breathless from laughing. But that part of their story belonged to the before. Before the layoffs at the factory. Before Daniel's shoulders began to sag and his eyes started drifting to a faraway place, even when he sat right across from them at the table. Before the calendar on the wall turned into a quiet list of unpaid bills instead of birthdays and family plans. Emily remembered the first time she realized something was truly wrong. It was a Tuesday night, and the air smelled faintly of rain. Daniel had come home later than usual. He set his keys on the table very gently, as if they were made of glass, then sat down in the armchair and stared at the blank television screen. Claire came running with a drawing she had made, holding it out proudly. "Look, Dad, it's us at the park." He blinked as if waking from a dream and tried to smile, but his mouth didn't quite remember how. "That's beautiful, Claire," he said. "I'll hang it up later." But he didn't. The paper ended up tucked under a pile of letters, forgotten for days. Emily watched these small things pile up like invisible dust. The way he left his favorite tools untouched in the garage. The way he forgot simple things like turning off the porch light or finishing a cup of coffee. He moved slower, spoke quieter, and sometimes he seemed not to hear them at all. The house, once filled with clinking dishes and bursts of laughter, grew heavier and quieter, as if it were holding its breath. Then came the afternoon when the sisters came home from school and found the kitchen a mess of papers, open envelopes, and a single notice from the factory lying in the middle of the table. The words were simple and cold. His job was gone, and there would be no more paychecks. Emily read it once and felt something in her chest sink. Claire didn't understand the details, but she understood the silence that followed. Daniel sat at the table with his hands folded, staring at the letter. "Does this mean you don't go to work anymore?" Claire asked, her voice small. Daniel gave a short laugh that held no joy. "It means," he said slowly, "that I'll be home more. We'll figure things out." But even Emily, still young herself, could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Days turned into weeks, and the house slipped into a new rhythm that didn't feel like a rhythm at all. Without the structure of work, Daniel's nights stretched longer. He sat up late, sometimes with the lights off, staring into the darkness as if waiting for it to answer a question no one else could hear. Mornings came later and later for him. The girls would leave for school with a quiet kiss on his cheek, unsure if he'd be awake when they returned. The fridge became emptier, the meals simpler, the laughter rarer. One evening, Emily stood at the window, watching her father sit alone on the back steps. He seemed smaller, like a man made of paper who might fold and crumple if the wind blew too hard. Claire stepped up beside her. "Do you think he's mad at us?" she whispered. Emily shook her head quickly. "No, he's just tired." The word felt too small for the ache in his eyes, but it was all she had. "We just have to be extra good, extra helpful. He'll get better." She said it firmly, as if saying it out loud might make it true. The sisters made silent promises to each other. They would keep the house as tidy as they could. They would do their homework without being asked. They would try to make him smile. Sometimes, on good days, it seemed to work. Claire would dance clumsily in the living room, and Daniel would chuckle and clap along. Emily would tell him about a story she was reading at school, and for a moment his eyes would light up with curiosity. "You always loved reading," he'd say. "Maybe you'll write something someday." In those rare moments, the old Daniel peeked through like sunlight between clouds, but the clouds always rolled back. The weight on his shoulders didn't lift, it only settled more deeply. Bills arrived, stacked, and sometimes went unanswered. Phone calls came that he ignored. Letters stayed unopened on top of the fridge, pushed aside where Claire couldn't see them. Emily noticed everything, her young mind trying to solve problems that were far too big for her hands. One night, the sisters were awakened by the sound of muffled voices. They crept to the hallway and saw their father on the phone, his back turned, one hand pressed to his forehead. "I'm trying," he was saying, his voice cracking. "I'm really trying. I don't know what else to do." Emily stepped back, pulling Claire with her before they could hear more. Claire's eyes were wide. "Is he in trouble?" she whispered. Emily swallowed hard. "He's just having a hard time. We have to be patient." She said it again, the way someone might repeat a prayer. In the months that followed, Daniel's world seemed to shrink to the four walls of the house and the shadows in his own mind. He began to forget small, everyday things. He would put milk in the cupboard and cereal in the fridge. He'd start tasks and leave them half-finished. Sometimes he would stand in the doorway of a room, looking around as if he had no idea what he'd come there to do. The girls adapted quietly. Emily made lists to keep track of chores. Claire learned when to ask questions and when to simply sit near him without saying anything at all. As the seasons changed outside, something hardened inside Daniel, like ground that had gone through too many winters. He grew more distant, his words fewer. Emily began to feel as if he were standing on the other side of a glass wall. She could see him, but she couldn't quite reach him. Claire, confused and hurt, took to drawing hearts on little scraps of paper and slipping them into his shirt pocket, or leaving them on his pillow. Sometimes he noticed, sometimes he didn't. The turning point came on an evening when the sky turned orange and purple, the world outside looking almost kind. The sisters came home from school to find the house strangely silent, the curtains half drawn. The living room was dim, and their father sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. He didn't look up when they entered. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "Dad, we're home." He lifted his head slowly, and they saw that his eyes were red, not from anger, but from a deep, exhausted sorrow. "Girls," he said, struggling to control his voice, I haven't been doing a very good job, have I?" It was such a simple question, and yet it carried the weight of the entire last year. Emily's first instinct was to argue. "No, that's not true," she said quickly. "You're just—" But the words caught in her throat. He shook his head gently. "You don't have to fix it for me, Em." The use of her nickname pierced her. "You shouldn't have to fix anything. You're kids." Claire stepped forward, her small hands clenched at her sides. "We just want you to be okay," she said. "We don't care about stuff. We care about you." He looked at her, and in his eyes was a mixture of gratitude and pain. "I know," he whispered. "That's what makes this so hard." Then came a pause, the kind that feels like standing on the edge of something high. "I think," he continued slowly, "I need help. The kind of help I can't give myself anymore." Emily's heart hammered. The idea of anyone else stepping into their quiet, fragile world felt both frightening and hopeful. She thought of the unopened letters, the ignored phone calls, the way he had begun to drift further and further away, even while sitting in the same room. "What kind of help?" she asked, her voice small. He took a deep breath. "There are people who know how to help families when someone gets stuck inside their own worries, people who can help me think clearly again." He rubbed his hands together nervously. "I should have reached out a long time ago. The days that followed were filled with appointments, visits from kind-faced professionals, and more questions than the girls had ever been asked in their lives. But those questions were gentle, wrapped in patience. They were asked by people who brought folders and clipboards, but also warm smiles and reassuring words. They explained that sometimes, when someone carries too much worry and sadness on their shoulders for too long, their mind and heart get tired in ways that are hard to repair alone. It was no one's fault, they said. It was something that could be treated, step by step. The sisters found themselves spending time with a social worker named Mara, who spoke to them in simple, honest language. She didn't pretend everything was easy, but she also didn't make it sound hopeless. "Your dad cares about you very much," she told them one afternoon at a small office with bright posters on the wall. "He's not disappearing. He's asking for help so that he can come back to you more fully." The words sank into Emily like a slow, steady warmth. Claire, swinging her feet nervously, asked, "Are we going to stay together? Me and Em?" Mara smiled. "Yes, you're staying together." That promise became an anchor for the girls as things around them shifted. For a while, they stayed with a kind, older couple, family friends who had known Daniel for years. The house smelled of cinnamon and old books, and there was always a light left on in the hallway at night. It wasn't home, not really, but it was safe. The sisters shared a room with 2 narrow beds and a single window that looked out over a quiet street. At night, they whispered to each other, trading fears and hopes. "Do you think he'll be different when we see him again?" Claire asked one night. Emily stared at the ceiling. I think he'll be trying, and that has to mean something." Meanwhile, Daniel entered a program where, for the first time, he spoke openly about the storm that had been raging inside him. He talked to people who understood the heavy drag of days without purpose, the way worry could grow into something that felt larger than life. He learned that he wasn't alone, that other people had gone through similar darkness and found their way forward. It was not easy. Some days he wanted to give up and slip back into his old habits of silence and avoidance. But every time he felt that pull, he thought of his daughter's faces, Emily's determined eyes, Claire's hopeful smile, and he stayed. Mara kept the sisters updated in small, careful ways. "He's working hard," she would say. "He's learning how to take care of himself again, so he can take better care of you. That takes time, but time is something we have." The girls clung to these updates like tiny lights in a long tunnel. They sent him letters through the program, little notes filled with simple truths. Emily wrote about school, how she had joined a reading club. Claire drew pictures, the 3 of them sitting together at a table, or walking in the park, or putting up a holiday tree. For a long while there were no replies, just the knowledge that their messages were being delivered. Then one day an envelope arrived with their names written in familiar shaky handwriting. Inside was a short letter from Daniel. He apologized, not with heavy, complicated words, but with ones the girls could understand. He told them he was proud of their strength and that he missed them every day. "I am learning how to be your dad again," he wrote. "Not just the dad who is there in the room, but the dad who is really there, with his heart and mind. I'm not finished yet, but I'm trying, and I won't stop trying." Emily read it aloud to Claire, her voice trembling. When she finished, they sat in silence, each holding a corner of the paper as if it might float away. The months slowly stitched themselves into a new pattern. The older couple who hosted the girls took them to the park on weekends, taught them simple recipes in the kitchen, and made sure they did their homework. They did not try to replace their father. They simply stood in the gap, offering stability while he worked on healing. The girls began to breathe more easily, their days no longer shaped only by worry. They made new friends, discovered small joys, an art project at school, a library book that made them both laugh, a neighbor's gentle dog that wagged its tail every time they passed. Then, one bright afternoon, Mara called them into the living room. She sat on the edge of an armchair, her expression both serious and warm. "Your dad has been making steady progress," she said. "His doctors and counselors agree that he's ready for an important step." Emily felt her heart leap and tense at the same time. "What step?" she asked. Mara's eyes softened. "He'd like to see you, in person, somewhere quiet and comfortable." If you're ready for that too. The world seemed to slow for a moment. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but not from sadness this time. Can we really? She breathed. Emily swallowed, then nodded. I want to, she said. I need to see him. Mara nodded. We'll make sure it's done carefully. No rush, no pressure, just a meeting. A chance for all of you to be in the same room again. The chosen place was a small community center near a park, with big windows and soft chairs arranged in a circle. On the day of the meeting, Emily and Claire arrived early with Mara. They walked around the room, touching the backs of chairs, looking out at the trees beyond the glass. Emily's hands were cold despite the warm sun. Claire clutched a folded drawing in her fist, the latest picture she had made of the three of them together. What if he's still far away? Claire whispered. Emily took a breath. Then we'll know he's still trying. And we'll keep trying too. The door opened softly. Daniel stepped inside, looking both older and somehow lighter at the same time. The deep lines of strain were still there, but his eyes were clearer, more focused. He paused when he saw them, as if he were afraid that moving too quickly might break the moment. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Claire let out a small, strangled sound and hurried toward him. He dropped to one knee, arms open, and she collided with him in a hug that seemed to knock the air from both of them. Emily stood frozen, tears blurring her vision. Daniel looked up at Emily over Claire's shoulder. His eyes shone, not with the distant fog she remembered, but with present living emotion. Hi, Em, he said softly. The nickname wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. You've grown. She let out a shaky laugh. You're the one who looks different, she replied. Better different. Slowly, she stepped forward. He reached out one arm, not pulling, just offering. After a moment's hesitation, she stepped into it. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the three of them held on to one another, not out of fear, but out of shared relief. When they finally sat down, the conversation did not come easily at first. There were pauses, awkward moments, and times when emotions climbed too high, and they had to stop and breathe. Daniel did not pretend everything was fixed. I'm still learning, he said at one point, looking from one daughter to the other. There are days that are harder than others, but I'm not alone with it anymore. I have people helping me, and I will never ever stop working to be the father you deserve. Emily listened, studying his face. For the first time, she realized that strength did not always look like someone who never stumbles. Sometimes, it looked like someone who admits they need a hand getting back up. Claire showed him the drawing she'd brought. It was simple. 3 stick figures holding hands under a sky filled with stars. I made this last night, she said shyly. Do you like it? His voice wavered. It's perfect, he answered. May I keep it? She nodded vigorously. It's for you. He folded it carefully as if it were the most precious thing he owned. Over the next weeks and months, the visits continued. Some took place at the community center, others at a park where they walked under trees and watched ducks on a pond. They talked about everyday things, school projects, favorite movies, memories of good days from the past. Bit by bit, they also began to touch the more difficult parts of their story, always with someone nearby to help guide the conversations. The girls learned that it was okay to say they had been scared, or lonely, or confused. Daniel learned to listen without turning away, without letting shame swallow him. The day finally came when they walked together up the front steps of their old house again. Fresh paint on the door, repaired hinges, a cleaned-up yard. It all gave the place a feeling of new beginnings. It wasn't magically transformed, but it was ready for them, just as they were ready for it. Inside, some furniture had been rearranged, some old things cleared out, making room for the life they were building now. In the hallway, Emily stopped and looked at a spot on the wall. Something's missing, she said thoughtfully. Claire grinned. I know. She ran to her bag, pulled out a new drawing, and taped it gently to the wall. It was another picture of the three of them, but this time they stood in front of their house with sunlight streaming from the windows. Daniel stood behind them, watching. Emotion rose in his chest, but it didn't crush him the way it once might have. Instead, it filled him with a fragile, powerful hope. You know, he said quietly, we're not going to be perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. There will be hard days. But we don't have to face them alone. Emily turned to him. We never should have had to, she said softly, not accusing, just stating a truth. He nodded, accepting it. You're right, and that's why I'm so grateful we have help now. Friends, counselors, people who know how to support us. He smiled faintly. And I have you. If you're willing to keep walking with me. Claire slipped her hand into his. Only if you promise to keep walking with us, she replied. He squeezed her hand gently. Deal. And so their story did not end with a grand, sweeping moment where everything became perfect. Instead, it unfolded in a series of small, hopeful steps, shared meals at the kitchen table, evenings spent reading or playing simple games, weekly check-ins with the people who had helped them through the worst of the storm. There were days when old fears stirred, when Daniel felt the weight of worry creeping back in. But now, instead of hiding, he reached out, to his support group, to Mara, to trusted friends. He talked, he listened. He let his daughter see that needing help was not a sign of failure, but a sign of courage. For Emily and Claire, the greatest change was subtle but profound. They no longer tiptoed through the house, afraid that any sound might shatter something fragile. They laughed without guilt. They argued sometimes, as sisters do, and then made up. They began to plan. A movie night here, a walk there, a simple weekend trip when the time was right. Their lives were no longer defined by what they had almost lost, but by what they were slowly, steadily rebuilding together. In time, the town came to see their family not as a sad story, but as a living example of what could happen when people paid attention, when they refused to look away from someone who was struggling. Neighbors dropped by not only when something was broken, but just to say hello. The older couple who had hosted the girls came for dinner every few weeks, their presence a gentle reminder that family can grow in unexpected ways. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sky turned gold, Daniel would roll back the rug in the living room, put on an old song, and hold out his hands just like he used to. Emily would laugh and shake her head, pretending she was too grown up, but eventually she would join him. Claire would whirl around them, all arms and spinning feet. Their steps were not always graceful. They bumped into furniture and into each other. But their laughter filled the house again, washing over old hurts like a slow, healing tide. The shadows that had once seemed permanent now looked smaller, kept at bay by the simple, stubborn light of their love. In the months after they returned to the little house with the fresh-painted door, life did not suddenly become easy, but it did become real in a new and gentler way. Mornings began with the soft sound of the kettle and the familiar creak of the kitchen chair as Daniel sat down with a cup of coffee, not staring into nothing, but glancing at the clock, at the calendar, at the small notes Emily had started pinning to a corkboard on the wall. One said, Library night, Thursday. Another said, Claire's art show, next week. He read them every day, letting the ordinary details of their lives guide him like small, steady lights. The girls fell into a new routine, too. Emily left for school with a backpack that felt lighter on her shoulders now that she no longer carried the secret weight of their family's troubles alone. She still worried, because that was in her nature, but the worry no longer wrapped around her like a tight band. Claire skipped beside her most mornings, chattering about a story they were reading in class or a project she wanted to start at home. Sometimes, when they reached the corner where the bus stopped, they would both look back and see Daniel standing in the doorway, raising a hand in a small wave. It became a silent promise between them. He would be there when they left, and he would be there when they came home. After school, the house felt different than it had in the dark days. There were smells of simple meals cooking, like soup on the stove or pasta with a little garlic and cheese. Sometimes music played quietly from the old radio on the counter. Nothing fancy, just familiar tunes that filled the silence without demanding too much attention. The girls would sit at the table with their homework spread out, and Daniel would sit nearby with a stack of papers from his program, underlining phrases or writing notes in the margins. Every so often one of them would ask, "What does this mean?" And they would lean over to help each other, the line between who was teaching and who was learning blurring in a gentle, comforting way. Of course, not every day flowed smoothly. There were mornings when Daniel woke up with a heaviness in his chest that made it hard to move. On those days, he would sit on the edge of his bed and practice the breathing exercises he had been taught, counting slowly until the pounding of his heart softened. He kept a small notebook on his nightstand where he wrote down 3 things he was grateful for each day, even if they were as simple as the sun came out or Claire made me laugh. When the girls noticed the notebook once and asked about it, he did not hide it. "This helps me remember that even on hard days there are good things too," he explained. "It doesn't fix everything, but it helps me stand up." Emily, intrigued, started her own list on scraps of paper tucked into a jar. Claire, not wanting to be left out, began drawing tiny pictures of things she loved: a tree, a cookie, a smile, and dropping them into the jar as well. Every few weeks they would pour out the contents on the table and look at them together, a small pile of proof that their lives held more light than darkness now. Their connection to the people who had helped them did not disappear. Mara visited every so often, sitting in the living room with a cup of tea, asking simple questions that invited honest answers. "How has this week been?" she would ask. Sometimes Emily rushed to answer first, her words tumbling over each other. Other times Claire spoke up about a small victory, like how her father had come to her school performance even though large crowds still made him nervous. Daniel would listen quietly and then add his own perspective, not shying away from the moments he had struggled. These visits were not tests. They were checkups for the heart of their family, making sure it kept beating strong. The older couple who had hosted the girls during the hardest time became something like honorary grandparents. They came over for dinner on Friday nights, bringing a pie or a loaf of bread, and stayed to play cards or tell stories about when they were young. The girls loved those evenings, the sound of multiple voices weaving together in the kitchen, the comfortable way Daniel laughed at gentle teasing from his old friends. There was an unspoken understanding that everyone in that room had, at one point, chosen to stand by this family instead of turning away. That shared choice sat between them like a quiet, glowing ember, warming everything around it. School projects became milestones that marked how far they had all come. When Emily had to write an essay about a time someone showed courage, she wrestled for days with what to say. Part of her wanted to write about her father, but another part felt protective of their story. In the end, she wrote about a person who decided to ask for help even though it was scary. She didn't use names. Her teacher wrote a note at the bottom of the paper: "Beautiful and honest. Thank you for sharing this." Emily showed the paper to Daniel one evening, the red-inked words glowing softly in the lamplight. He read it twice, then looked up at her. "Do you think I was courageous?" he asked, clearly surprised by the idea. Emily nodded, her throat tight. "You stayed. You tried. You didn't give up on us. That's courage to me." He blinked quickly and folded the paper with care, as he had done with Claire's drawing long ago. Claire, in her own way, carried their shared story into the world too. For an art assignment, she painted a picture of a house with a patch of dark clouds above it, and a single strong beam of light breaking through. In the front yard, 3 figures held hands, their faces turned upward. When her classmates asked what it meant, she just smiled and said, "It's about my family." Her teacher hung the painting in the hallway, where it caught the eye of people passing by, a little window into the way hope can find its way into even the most overcast sky. One autumn afternoon, as leaves began to fall in slow, colorful spirals, the 3 of them took a walk through the park where they had once spent happier times. The path was familiar, but it felt like they were walking it for the first time together, as who they now were. A family that had gone through a long storm and was still standing. They stopped on a small footbridge over a shallow stream, watching the water slip around rocks and fallen branches. "Remember when we used to play here?" Claire asked, leaning over the railing. "You pretended the water was lava, and we had to jump from stone to stone," Daniel replied with a soft chuckle. "You always put me on the biggest rock so I wouldn't fall in." "You always caught us if we slipped," Emily added, surprising herself with how clear the memory felt. even when we thought we didn't need you." Daniel looked at both of them, his expression filled with something deep and steady. "I dropped you for a while," he said quietly. "Not on purpose, but I did. I'm so sorry for that." Emily shook her head. "You didn't drop us," she answered slowly. "You got pulled under. But you grabbed the rope when people threw it to you, and now you're here." Claire reached out and wrapped an arm around his waist. "We're all here," she said. They stood that way for a long time, just breathing in the crisp air and listening to the water below. As the years passed, their story did not become something they tried to hide. Instead, it gently shaped the choices each of them made. When Emily was old enough, she started volunteering at a community center, reading to younger children whose homes were going through hard times. She had a way of sitting beside them that made them feel less alone, even if they didn't have words for what they were feeling. Sometimes, when a child hesitated before taking a book or speaking up, she recognized that look in their eyes and thought, "I remember what that feels like." Then she would smile and say, "We can take this one page at a time." Claire grew into a young woman with an artist's heart and a quiet strength. Her drawings and paintings often carried themes of light breaking through darkness, of hands reaching out to each other, of homes that looked a little worn on the outside but glowed warmly within. When people asked her where her inspiration came from, she would shrug and say, "From real life, I guess." But inside she knew exactly which nights and which mornings had shaped those images. Daniel, for his part, remained committed to the habits that had helped him back to himself. He attended support meetings, sometimes speaking up to share his experiences with others who were just beginning their journeys. At first, his voice trembled when he spoke about the time he had felt trapped inside his own sadness. But over time, his words grew steadier. "I thought asking for help meant I had failed," he would say. "I was wrong. Asking for help is what gave my daughters their father back." People listened, some with tears in their eyes, some with their arms folded tightly as if trying to hold themselves together. He never pushed. He just told his story and let it be what it was. On the anniversary of the day they had all sat together in the community center for the first time, they made a quiet tradition of going out for ice cream. It wasn't a big ceremony or a heavy moment. It was simply their way of honoring the day their family had taken its first step back toward each other. They would sit in a booth by the window, the same booth every year if they could, and clink their spoons together in a soft, joking toast. "To us," Claire would say. "To keeping going," Emily would add. And Daniel, smiling, would finish, "To asking for help when we need it, and to never forgetting how far we've come." If someone walking by the window glanced in, they might see nothing more than a father and his two daughters sharing dessert and laughter. They would not know about the nights of worry, the tears, the fear, the long climb back. They wouldn't see the invisible scars or the quiet victories. But that was all right. The three of them knew the full story, and that was enough. In the end, their lives did not turn into a perfect, shining picture where nothing ever went wrong again. There were still arguments about chores, disappointments at school, days when old shadows tried to creep back in. Yet, time and again, they returned to the lesson that had saved them. No one has to carry everything alone. They talked. They listened. They reached out. And in doing so, they proved day after ordinary day that even when a family cracks under the weight of hardship, those cracks can become the lines where the light gets in, illuminating a new kind of strength, one built not on pretending everything is fine, but on gently, bravely learning how to heal together. Years drifted by, and the house at the edge of the neighborhood became known as the place with the bright yellow curtains and the garden that Claire tended every spring. Neighbors passing by on evening walks would sometimes see the three of them sitting on the front porch, rocking slowly in mismatched chairs, their voices rising and falling like music. The girls grew taller, their faces losing some of the softness of childhood and taking on the sharper lines of young adulthood. Emily finished high school near the top of her class, her teachers writing letters of recommendation that praised not only her intelligence, but her compassion and resilience. She enrolled in a community college nearby, choosing to study social work, a decision that surprised no one who knew her story. "I want to be like Mara," she told her father one evening as they sat at the kitchen table with college brochures spread between them. "I want to be the person who shows up when families are falling apart and helps them find a way forward." Daniel felt pride swell in his chest, but also a flicker of concern. "It's hard work," he said gently. "You'll see a lot of pain. A lot of situations that don't have easy answers." Emily met his eyes steadily. "I know," she replied, "but I also know what it feels like to have someone refuse to give up on you. That's worth the hard parts." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Then you'll be amazing at it." Claire followed a different path, one that wound through art classes and after-school programs where she learned to work with clay, charcoal, and paint. Her teachers recognized a raw talent in her, but more than that, they saw the way she poured emotion into every piece she created. Her art was never just decoration. It told stories, a sculpture of two hands reaching toward each other, a painting of a doorway with light spilling out into darkness, a series of sketches showing a single tree through the seasons, its branches bare in winter, blooming in spring, full and green in summer, and glowing gold in autumn. When asked to explain her work in a school exhibition, she wrote a simple statement on a card. "These pieces are about change, hope, and the people who help us grow." Visitors to the exhibition paused in front of her work, some of them visibly moved, sensing the deeper current beneath the images. Daniel attended both of his daughter's milestones with a mixture of joy and quiet humility. When Emily walked across the stage to receive her associate degree, he sat in the audience with Claire beside him, both of them clapping until their hands hurt. When Claire's artwork was selected for a regional youth showcase, he drove her to the gallery and stood beside her as strangers admired what she had made, his heart so full he thought it might crack open. These moments were not just celebrations of his daughter's achievements. They were proof that the darkest chapter of their story had not written the ending. As the girls stepped further into their own lives, Daniel found himself navigating new challenges. The house felt quieter during the day when both daughters were at school or work. He had returned to part-time employment at a small repair shop in town, a place that welcomed him back without judgment, where he could work with his hands and lose himself in the rhythm of fixing broken things. It was not glamorous, and it did not pay much, but it gave him structure and a sense of purpose. His co-workers, some of whom had known him before his collapse, treated him with a casual kindness that meant more than grand gestures ever could. "Good to have you back, Dan," the shop owner had said on his first day. "We missed having you around." Those simple words anchored him. But there were still difficult days. Sometimes a customer would bring in an object that reminded him of the time he had lost. A broken radio like the one he used to fix in his garage, a lamp that his late wife had once admired. On those days, old grief would rise up like a tide, and he would have to step outside for a moment, breathe deeply, and remind himself that feeling sadness was not the same as drowning in it. He kept the phone number of his counselor in his wallet and used it when he needed to. He attended his support group meetings every other week without fail, even on nights when he felt fine, because he had learned that staying well required maintenance, not just crisis intervention. One evening, a new member joined the group, a younger man who sat with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, radiating the same kind of defensive exhaustion that Daniel remembered feeling years ago. The group facilitator invited anyone to share, and after a long silence, Daniel spoke up. "I used to think that admitting I needed help was the same as admitting I was broken beyond repair," he said, his voice calm and clear. "I was wrong. Asking for help was the first step toward becoming whole again. It didn't happen overnight. It took years. But it happened." The younger man looked up, his expression shifting slightly, something like hope flickering in his eyes. After the meeting, he approached Daniel. "Do you really believe that?" he asked. "That it gets better?" Daniel nodded. "I do. Not perfect, not easy, but better. And better is enough to build a life on." The man thanked him quietly and left, but Daniel felt the weight of that exchange long after. It reminded him why he kept showing up, kept talking, kept trying. His story was not just his own anymore. It was a thread in a larger tapestry of people helping people survive and eventually thrive. At home, the three of them continued to navigate the small, meaningful rituals that held their family together. Sunday dinners became sacred, a time when no matter how busy their weeks had been, they gathered around the table and shared a meal. The food was never fancy: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a simple salad, but it was made with care, and it was eaten with gratitude. They took turns talking about their weeks, the good moments and the frustrating ones, and they listened to each other without interruption. Sometimes the conversations grew serious. Emily would talk about a case study from her classes that had shaken her, a family whose circumstances reminded her too much of their own past. Claire would describe a piece of art she was struggling to finish, unsure if it said what she wanted it to say. Daniel would share a moment from work or from his support group, offering his own vulnerabilities as a way of saying, "We are still in this together." Other times, the conversation was lighter. They joked about terrible movies they had watched, debated whether pineapple belonged on pizza, and reminisced about funny moments from the past, the kind of shared memories that only families hold. Those dinners were not performances or obligations. They were anchors reminding each of them that no matter what happened outside those walls, this table was a safe place to return to. As Emily progressed in her studies, she began doing field work, visiting families in crisis under the supervision of experienced social workers. The work was every bit as hard as her father had warned. She met children who reminded her of herself and Claire, eyes too old for their faces, carrying worries no child should have to carry. She met parents who were overwhelmed, angry, ashamed, defensive, or heartbreakingly hopeful. She learned to sit with people in their pain without trying to fix everything immediately, to ask the right questions, to listen more than she spoke. Some nights, she came home exhausted, her emotions raw and her mind racing. On those nights, Daniel would make her a cup of tea and sit with her in the quiet kitchen, not offering advice unless she asked, just being present. "You're doing important work," he would say, "and you're doing it well. But don't forget to take care of yourself too." She would nod, sipping her tea, letting his words settle over her like a blanket. Claire, meanwhile, found herself drawn to teaching art to younger kids at a community center, the same one where she and Emily had spent time during the hardest period of their lives. It felt right to return to that space, not as someone in need, but as someone who could give back. She taught children how to mix colors, how to see shapes in everyday objects, how to express feelings they did not yet have words for. Some of the kids came from difficult homes, and Claire recognized the signs: the hesitation, the guardedness, the way they flinched at loud noises or sudden movements. She made her classroom a gentle place, where mistakes were just part of the process and where every finished piece was celebrated, no matter how simple. One afternoon, a little girl with tangled hair and a too-big sweater painted a picture of a house with a crooked door and dark windows. Claire knelt beside her. "Tell me about your painting," she said softly. The girl shrugged. "It's just a house." Claire nodded. "It's a very strong house. See how it's still standing even though the door is a little crooked? That means it's brave." The girl looked up, surprised, then smiled a small, tentative smile. Claire's heart ached and soared at the same time, knowing that sometimes a single kind word could plant a seed that would grow in ways no one could predict. In the background of all these individual journeys, the community around them continued to play a quiet, crucial role. The older couple who had once hosted the girls became regulars at their dinner table, their presence a living reminder that family is not only about blood but also about who chooses to show up. The repair shop owner checked in on Daniel not out of pity, but out of genuine friendship. Mara, who had long since closed their official case, still sent a card every holiday, a simple note saying she was proud of them. The town itself seemed to hold a collective memory of the family that had almost fallen apart, but had chosen, again and again, to hold on. When Emily gave a presentation at a local community event about the importance of mental health resources, people in the audience nodded, and some approached her afterward to share their own stories. When Claire's art was featured in a small local gallery, the opening night was packed with neighbors and friends who came not just to admire the work, but to celebrate the young woman who had created it. These moments wove a safety net beneath them, a network of care that caught them when they stumbled and cheered when they soared. There were, of course, setbacks. Life did not suddenly become a straight line of progress. One winter, Daniel caught a bad flu that left him bedridden for over a week. The forced stillness, the isolation, the feeling of being trapped in his own body brought back echoes of the darkest times. He found himself staring at the ceiling, old fears whispering in his mind. But this time, he did not face it alone. Emily brought him soup and sat by his bedside, reading aloud from a book. Claire drew silly pictures and taped them to the wall where he could see them from his pillow. When he admitted, his voice rough from coughing, that he was scared the darkness might come back, they did not dismiss his fear. "Then we'll watch for it together," Emily said firmly. "And if it starts to come back, we'll get help. Just like before." He nodded, comforted not by false promises that everything would be fine, but by the truth that he did not have to fight alone. Another challenge came when Claire, in her late teens, went through a period of her own struggle. The weight of everything she had experienced as a child, which she had mostly set aside in order to keep moving forward, began to resurface. She had nightmares about the old days, about cold nights and empty cupboards, and the feeling of not knowing what would happen next. She started pulling away, spending more time in her room, her art taking on darker, more chaotic tones. Emily noticed first. "Something's not right with Claire," she told her father one evening. Daniel's heart sank, but he did not panic. He had learned over the years to face problems directly. He knocked gently on Claire's door and asked if he could come in. She was sitting on her bed, sketchbook open, her pencil moving in quick, agitated strokes. "Can we talk?" he asked. She didn't look up. "I'm fine." "You don't seem fine," he said carefully. "And that's okay, you don't have to be fine all the time." That simple permission seemed to crack something open in her. She set down her pencil and looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed. "I keep thinking about how scared I was back then," she whispered, "and I get angry that we had to go through that. And then I feel guilty for being angry, because you're better now, and I should just be grateful." Daniel sat down beside her, his heart breaking and mending at the same time. "You're allowed to be angry," he said. "You're allowed to grieve for the childhood that got interrupted. That's not a betrayal of me or of how far we've come. It's just the truth." She leaned into him and he wrapped his arms around her, the way he had done when she was small. "Maybe," he suggested gently, "it would help to talk to someone who knows how to help people sort through these feelings." Claire hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, yeah, maybe." And so she began her own journey of healing, attending counseling sessions where she learned that trauma does not disappear just because life gets better. It has to be acknowledged, processed, and integrated. Her art began to shift again, not back to only light and hope, but to a more complex blend of shadow and brightness, acknowledging both the pain and the beauty of her story. Emily, watching her sister go through this, felt a deep respect for Claire's courage, and also a recognition of her own need to continue processing their shared past. She returned to her own counseling, which she had paused after finishing school, realizing that healing was not a destination but an ongoing practice. The three of them, each in their own way, kept doing the work. As time continued its steady march, milestones came and went. Emily graduated with her bachelor's degree and was hired by a nonprofit organization that worked with at-risk families. Her first official day on the job, she sat in a small office with a desk, a chair, and a window overlooking a playground. She thought about the little girl she had been, tiptoeing through a dark house, trying to hold everything together. She thought about Mara, who had sat with her and Claire and made them feel seen. And she whispered to herself, "I'm going to do this right. I'm going to show up for people the way others showed up for us." Claire was accepted into an art program at a nearby college, a scholarship covering most of her tuition. On the day she received the acceptance letter, she ran through the house shouting, her joy so loud and bright that it filled every corner. Daniel scooped her up in a hug, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. "I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice thick. I always knew you had it in you." She pulled back and looked at him seriously. "I wouldn't be here without you," she said. "Without all of us." He shook his head gently. "You would have found your way. But I'm grateful I get to be here to see it." On the evening of Claire's high school graduation, the three of them stood together in the backyard as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. They had hung string lights between the trees, and a small group of friends and neighbors would arrive soon for a celebration. But for this quiet moment, it was just the three of them. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Emily asked, her voice thoughtful. Daniel considered the question. "I do," he admitted. "I think about how close we came to losing each other. Not in the worst way, but in the slow, sad way where people drift apart because the weight is too much." He paused, looking at both of his daughters. "But we didn't, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." Claire, standing between them, reached out and took each of their hands. "I think we saved each other," she said simply. "It wasn't just you getting better, Dad. It was all of us deciding that we were worth fighting for." They stood like that as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. Three people who had walked through fire and come out scarred but whole, their bond not weakened by what they had endured, but deepened, tempered, made unbreakable. When the guests arrived and the backyard filled with laughter and conversation, someone asked Daniel how it felt to have both his daughters grown and heading out into the world. He smiled, the kind of smile that carried years of sorrow and joy tangled together. "Terrifying," he said honestly, "and wonderful. They're going to do amazing things, and I'll be here cheering them on one day at a time." Because that, in the end, was the lesson their story had taught them all. Life is not measured in grand victories or tragic defeats, but in the small, steady choices made every single day. The choice to get out of bed when it feels impossible. The choice to reach out when pride says to stay silent. The choice to forgive, to try again, to believe that tomorrow might be a little bit easier than today. And in those choices, repeated over and over, a family that had once been broken found its way back to something stronger and truer than it had ever been before. The seasons turned, and with them came new chapters in each of their lives. Chapters written not in crisis or desperation, but in the quieter ink of daily perseverance and small victories. Emily settled into her work with a dedication that both inspired and occasionally worried those who loved her. She threw herself into each case, learning the names and stories of the families she served, sitting in living rooms that smelled of old carpet and worry, listening to parents who were exhausted, and children who had learned not to hope too loudly. She carried notebooks filled with resources, phone numbers, and appointment times. But more than that, she carried a kind of patient empathy that came from having lived on the other side of the desk. Her colleagues noticed it quickly. "You have a way of connecting with people," her supervisor told her after observing a particularly difficult family meeting. "They trust you. That's rare, especially for someone so new to the field." Emily ducked her head, uncomfortable with praise. "I just try to remember what it felt like," she said quietly. "To be scared and not know if anyone really cared." Her supervisor nodded slowly. "That's a gift. But make sure you're taking care of yourself too. This work can burn you out if you're not careful." Emily promised she would, and she meant it, but in practice it was harder than it sounded. She found herself thinking about her cases late into the night, lying awake and wondering if she had said the right thing, done enough, pushed too hard or not hard enough. She started keeping a journal, a habit her old counselor had taught her, where she wrote down her worries and also her small wins. "Today I helped a mom find a food pantry that also offers free childcare. She cried and hugged me. I didn't fix everything, but I helped. That has to be enough." On the nights when the weight felt too heavy, she would call her father or her sister, and they would talk until the knot in her chest loosened. "You can't save everyone," Daniel reminded her gently during one such call. "I know that's hard to accept, but you can show up and that matters more than you realize." She held on to those words like a lifeline. Claire, meanwhile, blossomed in her art program, her talent growing sharper and more confident with each semester. She experimented with new mediums, moving beyond painting and drawing to explore sculpture, installation art, and even digital design. Her professors praised her technical skill, but they also noted something deeper in her work, a persistent theme of resilience and transformation that ran through nearly every piece she created. For her midterm project, she built a mixed-media installation that stunned her classmates. It was a small room constructed of salvaged wood and fabric, dimly lit, with old weathered objects scattered inside, a broken chair, a chipped mug, a torn blanket. But woven throughout the space were delicate threads of light, fiber optics that glowed softly, tracing pathways from one object to another, connecting them in a web of quiet beauty. Visitors were invited to step inside and sit for a moment in the dim space. As their eyes adjusted, they would begin to see the light, the connections, the way even broken things could be part of something whole. Claire titled the piece, "Still Standing," and beside it, she placed a small placard with a quote she had written herself. "What is broken is not beyond love. What has fallen can still be held." People stood in line to experience the installation, and more than one person left with tears in their eyes. When her professor asked her to talk about the inspiration behind the work, Claire hesitated, then spoke with quiet honesty. "I wanted to create a space that felt like what my family went through," she said. "A place that was dark and a little scary, but also full of hidden light. Because that's what it was like. We were broken, but we found our way to each other, and that made all the difference." Her words, her art, resonated far beyond the walls of the college. A local gallery owner attended the student showcase and offered Claire a chance to display some of her work in a group exhibition that summer. It was a small opportunity, but it felt enormous to her, a validation that her voice, her story, mattered in the wider world. Daniel, watching his daughters step into their futures with courage and purpose, felt an overwhelming mixture of pride and humility. He had spent so many years weighed down by the belief that he had failed them, that his collapse had stolen something irreplaceable from their lives, and in some ways, it had. He could not undo the nights they had gone to bed hungry or scared. He could not erase the memories of the times he had been physically present but emotionally absent, lost in the fog of his own despair. But what he could do, and what he did every day, was show up now. He went to Emily's work events when she was honored for her dedication. He attended every single one of Claire's art exhibitions, standing quietly in the background, letting her shine. He continued his own therapy and his support group meetings, not because he was in crisis, but because he had learned that mental health was something to be nurtured, not something to fix once and forget. One evening, the support group facilitator asked if anyone would be willing to speak at a community mental health awareness event, sharing their story to help reduce stigma and encourage others to seek help. Several people shifted uncomfortably, but Daniel felt a tug in his chest, a sense that this was something he needed to do. He raised his hand. "I'll do it," he said. The facilitator smiled. "Thank you, Daniel. I think your perspective will mean a lot to people." In the weeks leading up to the event, Daniel worked on what he wanted to say. He wrote and rewrote, trying to find the balance between honesty and hope, between acknowledging the pain and celebrating the healing. Emily and Claire both offered to help, reading drafts and giving gentle feedback. "Don't be afraid to talk about how hard it was," Emily said. "People need to hear that it's okay to struggle. But also make sure they know it got better," Claire added, "because it did. It really did." On the night of the event, the community center was full, rows of chairs filled with people of all ages, some looking curious, some looking skeptical, some looking desperately hopeful. Daniel stood at the podium, his notes in front of him, his hands trembling slightly. He looked out at the crowd and saw Emily and Claire sitting in the third row, both of them smiling at him with encouragement and love. He took a deep breath and began. "My name is Daniel, and a little over 10 years ago I lost my job, my sense of purpose, and very nearly my family." His voice was steady, stronger than he had expected. "I'm here tonight to tell you that asking for help saved my life. Not in a dramatic, immediate way, but in the slow, steady way that builds a future one day at a time." He went on to describe the spiral he had fallen into, the way depression and anxiety had wrapped around him like chains, making even the simplest tasks feel impossible. He talked about the shame that had kept him silent, the fear that if he admitted he was struggling, he would lose his daughters forever. "I was wrong," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Staying silent almost cost me everything. It was only when I finally reached out, when I let people help me, that I started to find my way back." He spoke about the support group, the therapy, the medication that helped balance the chemicals in his brain that had gone so far out of alignment. He talked about the people who had stood by him, the social workers and counselors and friends who had refused to let him disappear into his own darkness. And then he talked about his daughters. "My girls were so young when this happened," he said, looking directly at Emily and Claire. "They shouldn't have had to be as strong as they were, but they were. They loved me even when I couldn't love myself. And when I finally got the help I needed, they were there, waiting, ready to rebuild with me." His voice grew thick with emotion. "If you're here tonight because you're struggling or because someone you love is struggling, I want you to know that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to take as long as you need to heal. There's no shame in it, there's only courage." When he finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then applause began, soft at first, and then growing louder. People stood, and Daniel felt his eyes blur with tears. He stepped down from the podium and was immediately surrounded by people who wanted to shake his hand, to thank him, to tell him their own stories. Emily and Claire pushed through the crowd and wrapped him in a hug that felt like coming home. "You did it, Dad," Emily whispered. "You were amazing." Claire, her face streaked with tears, just held on tight. "I'm so proud of you," she said. That night became a turning point in a different way. Daniel discovered that he had a gift for speaking, for connecting with people through vulnerability and honesty. He was invited to speak at other events, at schools and community centers, at support groups and conferences. He never sought out the spotlight, but he never turned down an opportunity to share his story if he thought it might help someone else feel less alone. And slowly, gradually, he became known not as the man who had fallen apart, but as the man who had put himself back together and then reached out a hand to help others do the same. As the years continued to pass, the three of them settled into a new rhythm, one shaped not by crisis, but by intention and love. Emily advanced in her career, eventually taking on a supervisory role where she trained new social workers, teaching them not just the technical skills they needed, but the emotional resilience required to do the work without burning out. She spoke often about the importance of boundaries, of self-care, of knowing when to step back and ask for help. Her colleagues respected her deeply, and the families she worked with often asked for her by name, knowing that she would listen, truly listen, and do everything in her power to help. She dated occasionally, but never seriously, always putting her work and her family first. "I'm not ready yet," she would tell Claire when her sister teased her about being alone. "Maybe someday, but right now I'm exactly where I need to be." And she meant it. Claire's art career took off in ways she had never imagined. After the group exhibition, she was offered a solo show at a gallery in a nearby city, a small but respected space that specialized in emerging artists with strong voices. She spent months preparing, pouring every ounce of her skill and emotion into a new series of works that she titled The In-Between. Each piece explored the space between darkness and light, between despair and hope, between falling and being caught. The opening night was packed, the gallery buzzing with conversation and admiration. Critics praised her work for its emotional depth and technical mastery. Several pieces sold within the first hour, and Claire stood in the corner, overwhelmed, watching strangers connect with the story she had poured onto canvas and into clay. Daniel stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "Your mom would be so proud," he said softly. Claire leaned into him. "I think she'd be proud of all of us," she replied. As Claire's reputation grew, she began receiving invitations to teach workshops, to speak at schools, to mentor young artists who were struggling to find their voices. She discovered that she loved teaching, loved the way she could help someone see possibilities in a blank canvas or a lump of clay. She particularly loved working with kids who came from difficult backgrounds, kids who reminded her of herself. She started a free weekly art class at the community center, open to anyone who wanted to come, no questions asked, no fees required. Some weeks, only a handful of kids showed up. Other weeks, the room was packed. But every single week, Claire was there, offering materials, guidance, and most importantly, a safe space where creativity could flourish without judgment. One afternoon, a teenage boy who had been coming to her class for a few months stayed behind after everyone else had left. He was tall and quiet, his artwork dark and intense, filled with jagged lines and shadowy figures. "Can I ask you something?" he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Of course," Claire replied, setting down the brushes she had been cleaning. He hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "Did you ever feel like you were too broken to be fixed?" The question hit her like a physical blow, but she did not flinch. She sat down and gestured for him to do the same. "Yes," she said simply. "I did. There was a time when I thought the hard things that had happened to me and my family were too big to ever get past. I thought we were stuck that way forever." He looked up, his eyes searching hers. "But you weren't." "No," she agreed. "We weren't. It took time. It took help. It took all of us deciding that we were worth the effort of healing. And some days were harder than others. Some days still are. But we made it through." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Do you think everyone can?" Claire considered the question carefully. "I think everyone deserves the chance," she said. "And I think that with the right support, more people can heal than we might expect. But it's not easy, and it's not fast. You have to be willing to reach out, to let people in, to do the hard work of facing what hurts." She paused, then added gently, "Are you asking because you're going through something?" He looked down at his hands. "Maybe." She waited, giving him space. Finally, he spoke again. "Things at home are hard. I don't really want to talk about it. But being here, making art, it helps. It's the only place I feel okay." Claire's heart ached for him. "I'm glad you have that," she said. "And I want you to know that if things ever get to a point where you need more help, there are people who can support you. I can help you find them if you want." He nodded, still not looking at her. "Okay." She reached into her bag and pulled out a card with several phone numbers written on it. Numbers for counseling services, hotlines, resources for young people in crisis. "Keep this," she said, handing it to him. "You don't have to use it right now. But if you ever need it, it's there, and you can always talk to me. I won't push, but I'm here." He took the card and tucked it into his pocket. "Thanks," he said quietly. Then after a pause, "Your art, it helps me too. Seeing that someone can make something beautiful out of hard stuff, it makes me think maybe I can too." Claire felt tears prick her eyes, but she smiled. "You already are," she said. "Every time you show up here and put something on paper, you're making something beautiful. Don't forget that." He gave her a small, hesitant smile, then gathered his things and left. Claire sat alone in the empty classroom, thinking about the countless ways that pain and healing ripple outward, touching lives in ways we can never fully predict. At home that evening, she told her father and sister about the conversation. Emily, ever the social worker, immediately offered resources and advice. Daniel listened quietly, then said, "You're doing exactly what you're meant to do, Claire. You're being a light for someone who's walking through darkness. That's a powerful thing." As the years moved forward, the three of them began to talk more openly about the idea of legacy, about what they wanted their story to mean beyond just their own lives. Emily started writing a book, a guide for social workers and families navigating mental health crises, blending professional research with personal experience. She worked on it in the early mornings before work and on weekends, her laptop open at the kitchen table. Daniel often sitting across from her with his own cup of coffee, reading the newspaper or just keeping her company. "Do you think people will want to read it?" she asked him one morning, doubt creeping into her voice. "I think people need to read it," he replied. "You're offering something most textbooks can't, the view from both sides, the professional and the personal. That's rare and valuable. She smiled, reassured, and kept writing. Claire, inspired by her sister's project, began documenting her own journey through art and words, creating a visual memoir that combined sketches, paintings, and short essays about growing up in the shadow of mental illness and finding light on the other side. She submitted it to several publishers, not really expecting much, and was stunned when a small independent press offered her a contract. The book, when it was finally published, was slim and beautiful, filled with Claire's distinctive artwork and her honest, poetic prose. It did not become a bestseller, but it found its audience, people who saw themselves in her story and felt less alone because of it. Reviews praised its raw honesty and its hopeful message. One reviewer wrote, "This is a book about survival, yes, but more importantly, it's a book about the stubborn, quiet work of rebuilding a life after everything falls apart. It's a gift to anyone who has ever felt broken." When Claire read that review, she called her father and Emily, her voice shaking with emotion. "They get it," she said. "They really get it." Daniel's own contribution to their shared legacy came in the form of his continued advocacy work. He joined the board of a local mental health nonprofit, using his story and his voice to push for better access to services, more funding for support programs, and reduced stigma around asking for help. He testified at city council meetings, wrote opinion pieces for the local newspaper, and never missed an opportunity to remind people that mental health was just as important as physical health. On the 10-year anniversary of the night he had first reached out for help, the nonprofit held a special event in his honor, celebrating a decade of his advocacy and the countless lives he had touched. The room was filled with people whose stories intersected with his, former members of his support group, families he had spoken to at events, colleagues from the repair shop, neighbors who had watched his family's journey with quiet admiration. Emily and Claire both spoke at the event, sharing memories and gratitude. "Our dad taught us that strength doesn't mean never falling down," Emily said, her voice steady and clear. "It means getting back up, asking for help, and then reaching back to help others rise too," Claire added through tears. "He showed us that love is a verb. It's something you do every single day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." When Daniel stood to accept the recognition, he looked out at the crowd, his eyes finding Emily and Claire in the front row. "I don't feel like a hero," he said honestly. "I feel like someone who got lucky. Lucky that I lived in a place with resources. Lucky that I had people who refused to give up on me. Lucky that my daughters loved me enough to wait while I found my way back." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "But I also know that not everyone is as lucky. And that's why this work matters. We have to build a world where everyone has access to help, where no one has to suffer in silence, where asking for support is seen as a sign of strength, not weakness. That's the world I want to leave behind." The applause was long and loud, but Daniel barely heard it. All he could see were his daughters, standing and clapping, their faces shining with pride and love. In the years that followed, their lives continued to unfold in ways both expected and surprising. Emily met someone finally, a fellow social worker who understood the demands of the job and the importance of boundaries and self-care. They dated slowly, carefully, building a foundation of friendship and respect before anything else. When she brought him home to meet her family, Daniel and Claire welcomed him warmly, asking questions and telling embarrassing stories about Emily that made her blush and laugh. "He's good," Claire whispered to Emily later that night. "He looks at you the way you deserve to be looked at." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that she had not allowed herself to hope for. "Yeah," she agreed. "He is." Claire, too, found love, though hers came in an unexpected form. She met a woman at an art exhibition, someone who stood in front of Claire's work for a long time, visibly moved. They started talking, and the conversation flowed so easily that they ended up at a nearby coffee shop, talking until the place closed. The woman, whose name was Jordan, was a teacher, patient and kind, with a quiet strength that reminded Claire of her sister. They took their time getting to know each other, building a relationship based on honesty, creativity, and shared values. When Claire introduced Jordan to her family, Daniel shook her hand warmly and said, Anyone who makes my daughter smile like that is welcome at our table any time. Jordan grinned. I'll hold you to that. And she did. She became a regular at Sunday dinners, fitting into the family's rhythms as if she had always been there. Daniel, watching his daughters build lives filled with purpose, love, and connection, felt a sense of peace that he had once thought impossible. He was older now, his hair more gray than brown, his hands a little stiffer from years of repair work. But his mind was clear, his heart was full, and he was surrounded by people who loved him, not in spite of his past, but because of the full, complicated, beautiful truth of who he was. One quiet evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, the three of them sat on the front porch, rocking gently in their mismatched chairs. They did not talk much, content to simply be together, watching the world settle into night. Finally, Claire broke the silence. Do you ever think about where we'd be if things had gone differently? Daniel considered the question. Sometimes, he admitted. But I try not to dwell there. What matters is where we are now. Emily nodded. And where we're going. Claire smiled, reaching out to take each of their hands. Together, she said. Always together. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the three of them sat in the glow of the porch light, a family that had been tested by fire and had emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. Their love a quiet, enduring flame that would light their way forward one day, one choice, one moment of grace at a time. One moment